welcome back to the V6 project. The opening clip you just saw was actually of my previous late Series 3 ex-military 109. I built that truck up a few years ago and I thought I'd picked everything I really wanted to make the perfect pickup truck, and I was actually pretty close and I learned a lot along the way. Many of the things I applied to that truck I'm also going to build in this truck, but a lot more on that later. Anyway, let's get going. I'm thrilled, got my shop opened up again and got the truck back in place to get some work done on it. Been cleaning it up, taking some of the stuff off that we're not going to need, have the engine out temporarily. That's because I need to be able to get in and clean up the remains of the existing motor mounts, which I'd cut off with the engine in place, but I had to grind them flat so we could make up some real motor mounts, put the engine back in this afternoon after that's done, and start to measure up for motor mounts. And then it all comes out again while we prepare a whole bunch of other stuff for it. One of the things I'm doing today is a bit of a vanity item, and well, if you've ever galvanized a frame and you live in an area where they salt the roads, you'll know that over time this horrible concrete goop will form on the frame. It's like, well, it's pretty much like concrete. It must be some salt formation, and it's annoying. It'll continue to build up thicker and thicker, up to half an inch thick eventually, and the only way you can get it off is wire wheel it or brush it off, and it won't form on anything that's been painted. So believe it or not, I'm actually cleaning it all off the frame, and I'm going to paint the frame. Not black or white or pink or anything like that. I'm just going to paint it with some of the zinc rich coating that we use for other stuff. So it'll look just like a galvanized frame, but it won't build this stuff up, which will make me happy because I really hate it. Slow work, but it's got to be done. Actually, I haven't done much of it. I've had one of my guys doing it. Anyway, here's the stuff I'm talking about. It's called bright zinc. We buy it through an industrial supply in Halifax. It says right on it, designed for the galvanizing industry, not for sale to the general public. But you just walk in and buy it. But it's fantastic. And my understanding with zinc paint is that there has to be so much zinc in it that the particles actually touch within the pigment or the binder or the carrier or whoever really what binds it all together as paint. And if there isn't electrical contact between the actual fine particles of zinc in it, it's just not going to work. And apparently that's what makes this stuff good, because it is really good. We've used it on a lot of stuff, and it's almost as good as hot dip galvanizing. And it looks pretty much, goes on kind of gray, but it'll dry up almost like silver galvanizing. It's really, really nice stuff. Talk to you later.
One of the other things I want to work out today is suspension travel. Series Land Rovers have this quandary about springing. Stock springs, they get old and they get rusty and they lose articulation, and everyone thinks, oh, parabolics are the solution for me. Well, parabolics are great, they really are. I've had a lot of trouble with them. I've bought 5 sets of parabolics, all from the same manufacturer, and I have flattened out 5 sets of them. It may be the way I drive, it may be the loads I carry. So I'm giving up on parabolics, but not entirely. I'm going to use parabolic springs as locators for the axle, and then I'm going to use airbags. Airbags, you say, well, the Range Rover people were thrilled with them, weren't they? Most of them hauled them right back out. But I actually really like the idea of air suspension, mainly because it's adjustable. I've been running air shocks on the back of my 109s, this one and the one I had before it, and they only have about 200 pounds lift each, so a total of 400 pounds, but they've still made a huge difference, because that means I can put 400 pounds in the truck without affecting the ride height, which means I can have relatively supple parabolic suspension without overloading it when I have to put a load on. The load in my case is a relatively heavy load in the truck or a relatively heavy trailer. So the air shocks have sort of worked, but air shocks, as anyone who's used them before know, they have a really limited lifespan, especially if you drive them around in any grit situations. The seal at the top here is actually right on the shock tube, and a little bit of grit in there and they're done for. But you know, they did teach me something, and what they taught me was I want to be able to adjust my spring rate with air springs. So I'm going to put airbags in the back. I'm going to put great big tall ones, not your average convoluted ones that you see on the lowered street trucks, but actually quite a long spring that I'm going to send you a link to, and it's going to fit basically between the leaf spring behind the axle up to the side of the frame, basically behind the check straps. Now, right now I've got this high lift jack in that same location because I wanted to drive the spring down as far as I could with the jack to get a rough idea of the total suspension travel. Well, I've got 3-leaf parabolics on here which are flattened, and it's pretty hard to jack it down as far as it would go. In fact, I'm sure it would really drop another couple of inches if I say only had 1 leaf on here. But I pumped it down as far as I dare. So right now I have about 21 inches from the top of the springs to the top of the frame, where I'm going to be able to build my bracket to support the top of the airbag. The airbags I'm going to use in the back, as I said, are not those big convoluted ones, but relatively small. They call them the 70mm system, about 3 inches wide, and they're a rolling bag. So that'll fit quite nicely right in there. Got to make some brackets and figure out that. Again, I got to figure out the exact model of spring I want, but I pretty much know it, and again, I'll send a link to that. Then the next question is shocks. Now that I'm going to abandon these air shocks, I have to go back to standard Rover shocks. Well, I had actually just bought a set of Old Man Emu shocks, gas shocks, for this application. In fact, they were ordered specifically for an ex-military Land Rover because, of course, they have the raised shackles, so they're a little bit taller. And fully extended, these are about 18¼ inches. That's not even going to be close to enough travel for this truck without it even being really a lifted truck, just stock Land Rover ex-military height. The air shocks that I have on here now have about 22¼ inches total extension, and as you can see, the shock is off the mount right now because I wanted to see just how far I could pump it down, but I've got another 1.5 inches or so of travel, which would probably be within the scope of what I'd like to do here. So I got to find some longer shocks that have that same mounting stud at the bottom and big ring at the top. Let's go look at the front. Okay, up front now, well, I've done the same deal. I put the high lift in between the frame and the spring, and I've jacked it down as far as I dare. Again, it may not be as far as it would go under full droop, but it certainly gives me an idea. So right now, for full shock extension, I would need about 18½ inches. Okay, so with the jack out, you can see what I'm going to work at here. 18½ inches would be my full extension at that point. Well, this stock Rover shock, which I really don't know where it came from, but it was on my previous ex-military 109 when I got it, has 18½ inches of total travel. So what I was able to push it down there would have pretty much maxed that out. Again, I had recently bought some brand new Old Man Emus, designed specifically for ex-military, and at full extension these are 17½ inches. So again, these aren't going to cut it. I'll have to find myself some longer shocks. But that's not going to be so much of a problem because at least on the front of a Land Rover, it's the large eye both ends, and that's a much more common end fitting for a shock absorber. I think I've actually already found some. I'll just check my lengths. Anyway, up front the air spring is going to work differently because there's not a lot of room up here, especially on the other side where I have a steering gear. I can't move on the inside much because, well, the differential is right here on this side. So in this case, the spring is going to go between the frame and the axle, between the frame and the spring as it was in the back. But because the spring in the front of a Land Rover, or at least a Land Rover 109, is directly below the frame, whereas in the back the springs on a 109 are offset, they're outside the frame, so the air spring was able to come up past the frame. Here the entire air spring is going to have to fit between the spring and the frame, which isn't too bad really because I'm not expecting nearly as much travel in the front. Well, you might say, why bother with air springs in the front? Because the front is pretty much loaded the same all the time. Not really in my case, because in summer I run a great big winch bumper with a big winch on the front, and that's quite heavy. Of course, the new V6 is a little bit heavier than the stock series motor. And in winter, I'm going to have a snowplow on this truck. Now that's heavy. I'll actually take the winch bumper and the winch off. At least that'll lighten it up somewhat. But I am going to need some extra springing up front. And I don't really want to have great big 3-leaf parabolics because I think I'll flatten them anyway. So my point is, the actual springing, the load carried by the springing of the truck will be air springs. The parabolics that I use will really only be there to locate the axle. I may even go with single leaf, although bust one leaf and I lose an axle. So probably dual leaf front and rear and airbags. Now in the front, as I said, I don't have as much room. So I'm going to have to use a convoluted type spring, the kind that you see most common type of airbag or air spring. They're wider, they're about 6½ inches in diameter, but that's still fine up front because I have lots of room in here. What they don't have is a lot of travel. They have roughly about 6 inches of travel, which is roughly all I can really expect in the front of a relatively stock series Land Rover. Wow, a whole clip just on springing and shocks. I guess we really could talk about it all day. There's a lot more to it than that, but I wanted to give you just at least a quick overview of what I got planned. Obviously, as some of these parts come in, we'll be looking at them again and how they actually integrate into the truck, but I wanted to
at least give you an idea what I had in mind. Anyway, that's it for today, and tune in next time. See you later.